Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Political Forum. My name is Mike Jacobson. Now, this is your chance to speak with elected officials and those who are civically engaged right here in the city of Chicago. Joining us tonight, Dick Simpson, the former alderman and now UIC political science professor. Great to have you on the show.
Good to be here.
All right, so we're going to be talking about something that's been in the news for a long time, and that's the budget.
Okay.
You know, a lot of things going on. Like, so there's a $838 million deficit that we're trying to take care of there for the city. So, but now people, if you have a question about the budget, the numbers at the bottom of the screen, 312-738-1060. That's 312-738-1060. And please tell your friends and family they can also watch us online at cantv.org/hotline. Okay, so the mayor, so she delivered her budget address, a little while ago, probably 10 days ago, outlining the proposal to deal with the $838 million deficit. So overall, what are your feelings when if you were running the city and you saw that huge deficit? What are your feelings going into it?
So it's a difficult problem. The total budget is about $11.5 billion. So it's not like it's $100 billion that you get to work with. So it's a significant share, and it isn't easy to close. I mean, there's one easy way you could close it. You could simply increase the property tax $838 million. That would drive the voters crazy and the property owners crazy, but even the renters or anyone else, that's too excessive. So you say, well, we ought to cut the waste out of the budget. There are some fairly easy ways to do that. There were 1,400 vacancies at City Hall, that is, jobs that hadn't been filled. Now, some of those are actually pretty important, but in general what they decided to do was to take the jobs that were vacant and not fill them this year. That is a pretty big savings. They also looked and saw that they were paying relatively high interest rates on the city's bonds. Now, there are two ways to deal with that. The old way that happened a lot in the Emanuel administration is what was called scoop and toss. You just take the bonds, you refinance them for, say, 40 years, you spread them out, and the end result is you're paying double for doing it. What the Lightfoot administration has done is a little more sophisticated. They're taking the old bonds and refinancing them, but only for the same period of time. So they're getting the lower interest rates. The bottom line is that saves almost $200 million. So those are sort of the low-hanging fruit that's not too painful to do, and then it gets very difficult. Essentially, what Mayor Lightfoot and her team did was to find $540 million in savings and about $350 million in new revenue, both of which have some consequences. It also means that while she ran on a platform of lots of good new progressive programs, not all of them can be paid for this next year. So they're going to have to be phased in much more gradually than the mayor or her supporters would like to do, but there really is no option to that.
So one of the first things that mentioned was property taxes. Now, a lot of people are thinking that. Well, we actually show a picture, that we have that shows, the day of when the mayor, when she addressed, in front of the city hall, in front of the budget, what the crowd was like outside, because a lot of people, had their arms up because they were thinking, all right, there's a huge deficit, and one way the past, mayors looked at was at property tax increases, and a lot of people are saying again and again, but yet the mayor has yet to say there's going to be one.
There is only a very, very small one. They increased a separate tax, the library tax, property tax, $18 million, so they could reopen the libraries on Sunday. Rahm Emanuel had, in this first budget, had closed the libraries on Sunday and cut a large number of library employees, and that had caused some pushback, but it essentially has shortened the availability of libraries to the public, because Sunday's a very important day because people have the day off and they can go to the library. So Mayor Lightfoot is restoring the library to fuller use. And the problem is there's a small property tax, but it won't be noticed. It's a few dollars to the average property tax owner. It's not a serious problem. If she had done the $838 million or any large portion of it, it would be a huge increase, maybe a third more in property taxes or greater, depending on the level of the property and the costs involved.
So also, like, looking at how this breaks down, is that there's going to be needed support down in Springfield. There's a lot of things that are in this that are in her address, that will need the help of Springfield. One of the things is that she's looking, to generate about $50 million from real estate transfer fees on properties over $500,000.
Yes, and so there are really two issues in Springfield. Ideally, they would be solved this week in the veto session.
Right.
They may well not be and get kicked over until the new legislature comes in January. One of them is the real estate real estate transfer tax. If I sell you my house and it's worth more than $500,000, I would pay some more. But if my house is worth more than $10 million, I would end up paying 2% of the transfer. So it can run into some significant money in the larger property. There is already some real estate transfer taxes. This would increase them at the high end by 2% of what we already have in the transfer tax. And yes, it does bring in tens of millions of dollars, which is an important part of balancing the budget. The other thing that we need is we need three things. So the transfer tax is one.
Yep.
The second one we need to get approval of a working plan that would allow Chicago to have a casino. That wouldn't really dump money in next year, but it would in future years, and it would help solve the pension crisis that we continually face. So that's an issue. The tax structure that had been proposed by the state is too much. No one will build the casino under the current law. So the law needs to be amended to a reasonable tax structure, and that wouldn't bring money this year, but it would in future years. Mm-hmm. So that's an important one. There is additionally the need to do some tinkering, although it's really just to continue the recreational marijuana bill. That will bring us $30 or $40 million. So, as Edward Dirksen used to say, a million or billion here and a million and billion there, and you're soon into real money. You have to approach the budget with all of these pieces. And so we need help from the state legislature. If the state legislature and the governor don't come through, then we would still be, maybe after January, having to change the budget and get $100 million or $200 million out of the property tax. So we don't want that to happen. And these are already ideas that are well worked out. They're not difficult to understand. They may be difficult to pass because big business and wealthy people don't really want to pay a lot higher real estate transfer tax when they sell their buildings. And other people don't necessarily want to change the casino law for Chicago to make it possible. So we have that heavy lifting. The other big piece is the mayor has declared a surplus of $300 million in the TIF money, the tax increment finance. It gets very complicated when you get into tax increment finance districts, but the long and the short of it is this helps in two ways. It provides $160 million for the school system so that they can help settle the current teacher strike, and it provides some money for the city to help balance the budget. So there are a bunch of moving parts. There are also a few new expenditures out of the budget that are good. I'll just name two of them. One is $10 million that will go to services for the homeless. Another is $10 million that will go for better mental health care. And there's actually some money that's available for dealing essentially with the crime problem by providing some people on the street who can help manage the services to the south and west side of Chicago.
I think we'll break down that a little further on in the show. But right now, looks like we have a caller. Caller, are you there? Do you have a question or comment?
Hello.
Yes, hello, caller.
Hi. Thank you very much for taking my call. So my question was this. I read this morning that the University of Chicago could possibly be the first university in the nation to have $100,000 tuition for an undergraduate education. And I just wanted to know if an institution of that size pays any sort of tax revenue to the city, because instead of, constantly hitting up working people, if we could hit up organizations with that sort of cash, I think that would sort of ease the burden on taxpayers greatly. So I really kind of wanted to get some insight from our guest on that.
Great, thank you for that question. So University of Chicago, over $100,000 for tuition for students. Is that something possibly that could be used? That money, is there a tax? Any way we can tax UC, or they get a tax revenue to get some of that money, some of that piece of the pie?
It's probably not a great idea. I think the UC tuition, I'm not sure it is actually at $100,000, but it is very expensive. Let's say it's $50,000, $60,000 a year for undergraduates. I don't know the graduate rates. In comparison to my university, University of Illinois at Chicago, which is closer to $13,000 a year in tuition. That doesn't include if you have housing on the campus, but it's still a pretty big gap. I don't really want to try and drive the tuition at places like the DePaul, Loyola, University of Chicago, Northwestern Law School, and so forth. I don't really want to drive those prices up because we already have a problem of students and student debt that's enormous. And that's one of the problems with the budget is there are ways you could raise money, but would they have other effects because other governments are raising money, or the costs are out of hand in some sector of society. So it's a very delicate balancing act, and it's everyone's judgment. You could say, well, these are rich kids and they should pay more. But my judgment is no, you don't want to drive up college costs. We want to do the reverse, but that takes the federal government to make available programs to make tuition more affordable for everyone. Because we want more people to go to universities, get the jobs of the future that require that level of education.
And actually, it also might drive up the cost of tuition, too.
It would. In other words, if you put a 10% tax or something on the tuition,
who's going to pay for it?
You're going to add the extra money on the parents or the student and the debt that students come out of the college with. So you have to watch what you do, because it may create social problems that you don't want to create.
Right. So getting back to what you said before, because there's also investments going on, inside this budget, investments for resident engagement, violence prevention, affordable housing, and mental health. A lot of talk about affordable housing and helping the homeless population as well, and also about mental health, because this is something that with the previous administration, that a lot of people were going after, City Hall because of the cuts to mental health.
Yes, and it's not a solution that everybody agrees with. There are those who say, well, we ought to reopen the mental health clinics that we closed. But that may not be the most efficient. So I think it's worth giving the Lightfoot team, the Department of Public Health, a chance to show that by coordinating mental health services and providing $10 million more so that people can afford to get health care, that it provides better health care than we were getting when the clinics are open. If that doesn't turn out to be the case in a year or two, then I think we'll have to revisit it, and the question is always who's going to pay. The county also provides some mental health facilities. There are some others that are public facilities, and then there are many private facilities, and the problem is paying for the service. They are part of the key to solving particularly other problems like homelessness.
Right. So now looking at the revenue generated, so they're looking at a ride-share fees, about $3 in taxes and fees for downtown fares as another way to generate some money. Also raising taxes on food and drinks in the city, and also parking costs may go up with people who are parking around town.
Yeah, and most of those, I don't think we're going to, the average person is going to feel too much. For instance, if you take the congestion tax to try and, the extra tax on Uber and other rideshare services that go into the loop, it will take some of those cars off the roads and make the traffic better, and everyone who's driven through the loop currently will be sympathetic to that idea. And it will raise a little bit of revenue, but it won't stop. I mean, there will still be cabs and Ubers and Lyfts and public transportation, of course. I think it's a pretty good balance on that. The parking is a little more complicated, but for instance, we're going to put parking meters in the West Loop. Well, if someone's going to one of the fancy West Loop restaurants and paying more than $100 for their meal that night, paying $4.50 for an hour's parking is not going to break the bank. They probably expect their parking meters there now, and there aren't in many of the streets. The loop parking rates will go up some, but not astronomically. So it's always a balancing act. You've got to take the money from somewhere. So what's the fairest, best, least burdensome, and may have positive benefits, like in the case of the congestion tax? We may be able to straighten out some of the traffic flow problems, get more people to take bicycles and public transportation and so forth. It may or may not work, but it's not a bad way to try it out.
Now, let's get into the reason why we're here and why we have this deficit. So, looking to the future, do you think pension reform is something that should be looked at? Are there structural changes that are needed?
So let's talk about where we are with the pensions. The pensions, and I don't have the figures memorized, but the pensions go from a very low level of solvency, where they could pay 20% of the claims if everyone cashed in their claim right now, to 60, 70%, and in pretty good shape. And each pension fund varies a bit. The problem was, for years, we didn't pay what we said we would pay into the pensions, and we got behind, and that also meant the money wasn't in the pension fund, so it couldn't be invested and make more money. So when you do that for a couple of decades, you get pretty far behind. And this year, the pension fund's increase was $277 million. So when we're talking about the $838 million, $277 million had to do with the pensions. And we're going to have increased pension costs in future years, particularly 2023. So we have to restructure how we do business so we don't have that. One way to do that would be a change in state law that changed the pension benefits. We can offer a different pension package to future city employees. But right at the moment, we're sort of stuck with the pension problem. So we really have to deal with how do we pay for what we didn't pay for in previous decades. The other big one, so there are a couple of other big ones. One I call the corruption tax, which is $500 million a year. Mm-hmm. And a significant portion of that, about $100 million or more each year, is police abuse and police corruption in different forms and different circumstances. The John Burge example is pretty well known as torturing people to get convictions when they didn't commit the crime, and then keeping them in prison for 10 or 20 years. When they come out and we find out they didn't, we have to pay for the time that we put them away falsely, and so forth. Those we've been, to Rahm Emanuel's credit and to his corporation counsel, we did begin to, for the first time, truly deal with the Burge and other abuses and pay for them. Now we are still dealing with that bill. And then there's other kinds of corruption that, essentially stealing from the till or having crooked contracts that cost too much to do stuff at O'Hare. We need to get that as much under control as possible, but that's more than $100 million a year. And like I say, it can go up to, depending on which part you want to assign as the city's corruption, $500 million a year. We can't get all of it, but if we paid only half as much, we would have a lot more money to work with in the future city's budgets.
Because talk about the police reform. That's one thing that the mayor's looking at. Actually, just what came out today about the Independent Police Research Group recommending major changes to the Chicago Police Department. So this possibly is the avenue to make sure that down the line that there's not going to be.
So we don't want to have a repeat of hundreds of millions of dollars being paid for bad policing by abusive or corrupt policemen. There will always be some mistakes and some payments that are necessary, but that more than $100 million is of different kinds of claims against the city, and we could go on and on about other problems. You can only solve them, a step at a time. So right now, we have to pay for the sins of the fathers, as it were, and straighten out the past and move forward in the future in a better way.
What do you say to the critics who say that the tax base is leaving town? The population's going down.
The true solution to the problems of the city and state and county and all the other governments is economic development. And Mayor Lightfoot has addressed that outside the budget and within the budget to some extent, but even before the budget. What we need is a balanced economic development that covers all the neighborhoods, that deals with some of the crime problems and others at the same time. We need to, as Mayor Lightfoot has said, we need to grow the city back from 2.7 million to 3 million again. Those extra 300,000 people would be chipping in every day, whether they're buying a Starbucks or they're buying a house. It's the right way to solve the budget problem, and we've had that happen in the past in recent Chicago history when we've had come out of recessions and done better. We need to have economic development really take hold, and it can't just be some global corporations down in the loop or a couple of new startup IT companies. That's all good. We love every one of them because they're paying taxes. Yeah. And hiring employees who pay taxes and so on. But we need to rebuild, to build on what we've already done. And so that's the long-term proper solution to all of Illinois' economic problems and budget problems is economic development across the board, but particularly across all the neighborhoods of Chicago.
So it looks like we pretty much got a couple minutes left, about 2 minutes left. So a two-part question. Number one, what's going to happen now in the next month? Talk about the behind the scenes. You're involved in this when you're an alderman. What's going to happen the next month when we're looking down at City Hall? And then what's your optimistic, pessimistic view looking forward when it comes to the budget?
My prediction is the budget will pass for a very simple reason. The aldermen were frightened that they would have to vote for a high property tax increase on their constituents, and their constituents wouldn't like it and might throw them out of office. So the fact that there's no property tax increase makes it relatively easy. Doesn't mean the aldermen won't have suggestions, and there may be amendments, and there might be some up and downs on individual pieces of the budget, but I predict the budget will pass by more than 40-10 vote in the city council, unless something completely comes off the rails between now and the final votes at the end of December. So I think going forward, we will be going forward with the Lightfoot budget. I think the problems with the state are substantial, but I think the state would be foolish not to help Lightfoot solve this crisis, because if Chicago runs into problems, the state of Illinois' economy goes down the tubes. So whether downstaters like Chicago or not is irrelevant. If they want to have a good life in Illinois, we have to have Chicago work, and at the moment we have to have Mayor Lightfoot's budget and not some draconian budget that would drive homeowners and business owners out of the city and the state.
Wonderful. Well, hey, I know we've had limited time here because the show goes so fast, but so final thoughts, as we have about 30 seconds, 45 seconds,
So Lightfoot has faced three great challenges since she became mayor. First was whether or not she would have a majority in the city council. There have been 16 divided roll call votes so far. She's won them all, and she's won most of them with overwhelming majorities. So that was her first challenge. The second challenge was the school strike, and I hope by the time the program is ended that they will declare that they've settled the school strike. They seem very close to doing that. If that's behind us, that would be a great thing from the Lightfoot perspective. And the third is the budget, and the fact that we have a budget without draconian property tax increases, whatever one thinks about the individual pieces of the budget, is a major accomplishment.
Wonderful. Well, hey, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
For being on today. And thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And as always, this has been Political Forum. My name is Mike Jacobson. Joining us tonight has been Dick Simpson, the UIC Political Science Professor. Tune in next week, 7 o'clock, as we have another great show for you here on Political Forum. Until then, everyone, please have a great night.